Hi everybody and welcome to a brand new episode of Plaguenar, where I'm gonna show you how to paint some awesome tiled 2-color marble bases. And the first thing we're gonna need is some masking tape, which we will use to cover half of the tiles. After covering the length of the tile, I then leave a little bit of the masking tape so that I can also tape down the bottom edge of the tile and cutting it off with my X-Acto knife. I do this basically in all directions until a single tile is fully covered. To secure the masking tape at the bottom edge of each tile, I use my thumbnail to make sure it sticks well. I now do this across all the tiles to achieve my desired pattern, and to achieve a clean result I take my time and make sure that all the corners and edges are neatly masked off. If you wish a guide for sculpting these and other marble bases I've already done, let me know it in the comments. A little side note here: when masking the tiles, don't forget the partial tiles, as this will make the base look exceptionally clean at the end. At first glance this may not seem so important, but in the end the entire pattern will look much cleaner and more structured. In the end your base should be masked like this, and we can start painting the first marble pattern. And as a first color we're using Sons of Horus green mixed down with airbrush thinner in a ratio of 2 parts color to 1 part airbrush thinner. With the airbrush gun I carefully try to create a cross pattern on each tile. I also try to vary the spread for the color for each tile as well. This way I want to create slightly different patterns, which leads in the end in different marble patterns for all the tiles. To add even more variety to the tiles, I also try to place a spot of color on each tile in a different place. At the end, your first coat of color should look like this. Make sure that even the small partial tiles have been covered with a little bit of paint. As a second coat for our first tiles, we're using 2 parts Cyberite green and 1 part airbrush thinner. And then we simply follow the pattern we sprayed on earlier. To add a little bit more variety here too, we try to place the intensity of the color in different areas of all the tiles. For further variation and different marble patterns, I additionally highlight some edges and corners of the tiles in different places. Once the second color is dried, your base should look like this. For our last pattern highlight, we're then using Gauss Blaster Green and Airbrush Thinner in a 1:1 mixing ratio. And then I basically repeat the entire second step. However, this time I make sure that the highlights are a little bit smaller, and in addition, in some places I try to interrupt the flow of colors. This ensures more variation in the final marble pattern. In the end, your base should look like this, and we are ready to create the actual marble pattern. To create the marble pattern, we need baby wipes. However, these must be completely dry. My tip: buy a pack, open it, and leave it in the sun or on the heater for 1 to 2 days. Now we take the baby wipe and carefully pull it apart under tension. Once the desired pattern has been achieved, we wrap it around the base with the pattern covering our tiles. To keep it taut, tie it together and secure it with some masking tape. This prevents the baby wipe from being slipping during the next steps and ruining our pattern. As our first overcoat color, we're using pale grey blue of Vallejo mixed down with 1 part airbrush thinner. I then spray this paint evenly over all the tiles, and to ensure that the paint does not run and smudge under the baby wipe, I apply 2 to 3 thin, even coats of color over all the tiles. I'll let these first layers of paint fully dry and add another final pale grey blue coat on top for better coverage. As a final coat, we're then using P3 Moro White mixed down with 1 part color to 1 part airbrush thinner. And for a much more natural look, the trick is now to only use this color by adding uneven color spots to each tile. This gives the marble a natural look by simulating natural color variation. And after a quick coat of spot highlights, the trick is to let the paint dry so that it doesn't smudge, but to remove the baby wipe immediately while the paint is still slightly damp. And if possible, try not to touch the tiles yet, but work with the edge of the base as much as possible when unpacking it. And this is what the result of the first tiles should look like. Afterwards, we then apply a coat of Vallejo Premium Satin Varnish to ensure an even and natural looking surface. This also protects the paint layer from damage caused by further masking for the second tile pattern. Once the varnish has dried and the masking tape has been removed, the base should look like this. And now it's time to redo the masking of the tiles again, and this time we're covering the tiles we already have painted. And here too, always make sure that the lower edges are well masked and don't forget the partial tiles. After another session of masking, the base is then ready for further painting. And to refine the dark tiles a little bit more clearly, I go over the now masked base again with the black primer I used initially. And as a first color for the second tiles we're using staggered on scale green and airbrush thinner mixed down with 2 parts color to 1 part water. And we'll now repeat the same process as we did for the first tiles. In the first step, we simply create uneven cross patterns on each tile. The only difference I'm attempting here is that I apply a little bit more of color onto the tiles, that the pattern will be more visible later through the dark tones. As a second highlight, we're mixing down 2 parts staggered on scale green, 1 part pale grey blue and 1 part airbrush thinner. And then we're using this mix again in the same pattern as we did in the second step for the first tiles. We simply follow the pattern we applied in the first step, but try to create some variation in the distribution of colors between the individual tiles. By the way, using the pale grey blue as a highlight for the staggered on scale green just ensures a better harmony of colors in the overall picture. For the final highlight color, we're mixing down 2 parts pale grey blue, 1 part staggered on scale green and 2 parts airbrush thinner. And in the third step, we try again to follow the patterns and add some variety with interruptions of the color flow. And of course, don't forget the partial tiles, and for even more variety, add some random color spots. After spraying the tiles with the appropriate patterns, we can move on to using the baby wipes. Pull the baby wipe apart until you achieve the desired pattern. And then we're wrapping the base up in the baby wipe again, tie it together and fix all this with a little bit of masking tape. And for our first overcoat color, we're using Corvus Black mixed down with 1 part color to 1 part airbrush thinner. And we now proceed as we did with the first set of tiles. We spray each tile with 2 to 3 thin coats of paint. Once these have been dried, we spray a final coat over all of them again. As a final highlight, we're using Abaddon Black mixed down with 2 parts airbrush thinner, so 1 part color, 2 parts airbrush thinner. And here again we do the same as we did with the first set of tiles. We only spray individual spots on the tiles with this color. The color is only used to create natural looking variation in the color of the marble stones. Now it's time to remove the baby wipe. Remember to do this as soon as possible after the paint has dried, while it's still slightly damp. Again, try to touch only the edge so that the paint does not smudge. After that, you can already see a little bit of the black marble, but it only looks really cool once we've removed the masking tape from the first set of tiles. I recommend using an X-Acto knife and being very carefully while removing the masking tape. You just don't want to accidentally scratch the beautiful designed surface because you are in a hurry. After removing all the masking tape, you can already imagine how great this base will look in the end, but we'll make a few minor adjustments to give this a finishing touch. To prepare our wet palette for final touch-ups, we're mixing down 1 part Abaddon Black with 1 part water and 1 part pale grey blue with 2 parts water. And then we use these 2 colors to straighten the edges and even out any color overlaps that might have been occurred during the spraying. If you want a slightly more reflective look for the base, you can use a darker grey instead of black, and instead of light grey you can use simply white for the white tile edges. And I'm using here a little bit of a fairly bigger brush. This is a Artis Opus Series S size 1 brush. And for a uniform finishing look, we overcoat the whole base again with Vallejo Premium Satin Varnish. And to give this base a finishing touch and make it look even cleaner, we paint the whole trim with Abaddon Black. And this is what your result should look like in the end, but now let's see how this awesome base looks like with a great painted miniature on top. Thank you everybody so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I hope you had some fun and I hope to see you soon.